Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the bridge. Today we are on season 4, episode 11, and our special guest is Larry Martinez. And Larry and I met on LinkedIn, and he has had quite a wonderful celebratory weekend he's been telling us about with a 1 year old grandson. And those of us who are grandparents, we all really appreciate that. But Larry, I'll give you the floor in a minute to introduce yourself. But Sandy, have you got a quote for us?
I sure do. Hi, everyone. The quote for today is recognize that the world has only one you, just as you are. Today you are uniquely made and your gifts matter. And this is by Jessica M. Turner.
Okay, great. Well, Larry, thank you for coming on with us. And why don't you tell us? I mean, what attracted me about your resume on LinkedIn was that you're kind of in leadership and kind of a coach, talking to people about leading and things like that. So I don't know a whole lot about you other than your grandson. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, and I appreciate that. And what a great quote, because my daughter and her son-in-law went out the other day because they're from Denver. They came into where I'm based here in Tucson. They wanted to go out, and we had a big party for the first birthday, and so people and relatives were coming in from all over the place. And my wife had to go pick up her sister at the airport, and my son-in-law says, "Oh, can't you go pick her up because your wife, my mother-in-law does such a good job putting the baby down." And I'm like, "No, no, I could do it." He goes, "Trust me." And I'm like, and I'm thinking, what a great quote, because I took the baby. He cried for a little bit because it's new surroundings. When we got a crib for him, all the stuff you need to do as a
Right.
grandparents. Everything's kind of like substituted for
Yeah.
him. And I used to, when my daughter was little, I'd give her little Larry stories, what she called them, and I tell her, about my past, and little stories that were always had something fun, but always a moral. You remember Aesop's fables.
Yeah.
So my daughter comes home later, and she goes, "Did you have any problems?" And I go, "No, the baby went to bed," and I told him little Larry stories, and it was actually about being you, being that you have to be your own. And I talked a story about one of my own stories about how you have to make your own individual decisions. And my daughter says, "Oh, so you bored her to sleep, huh?" I'm like,
Thank you, daughter.
but the quote is
Oh,
great. But a
that's,
little bit about myself.
that's great.
I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. Actually, I grew up in, probably, father and mother had some issues. We lived probably in 10, 5 different states, 2 different countries. I went to 10 different schools by the time I got to high school.
Wow.
But the one constant was I always had good teachers. And I knew when I was a young age, I wanted to be a teacher. And I, and when I moved to Tucson, it wasn't until I hit high school where I had the first teacher that it was ever a Latino in my life. And so Coach Federico was just a good guy, got me into got me want to be a teacher, and I happened to be a pretty good athlete. Got a lot of scholarship offers, and I was a pretty decent student, and so I had a lot of opportunities. So I ended up going to college at Northern Arizona University. And what happened was, the day I graduated, my middle school principal, who is now a high school principal in the same area that I grew up in, South Tucson, asked me if I wanted to come back and be like Coach Federico and be a teacher. And so, lo and behold, I taught there in the district, taught different places. I was a girls track coach and cross country coach, because that's what I ran, track and cross country in college, and ended up coaching them, and ended up being an administrator. Uh, 15 years later, or actually 17 years later, got into administration, became a high school principal, and I was at 2 different schools, and retired and got a job as a middle school principal. And then I ended up turning these schools around, and I got offered by a job by a company called Westad, where I started doing consulting across the country. That led to a position in Boston, where I did turnaround in downtown Boston, which
Wow.
led me to downtown Denver, doing turnaround for the Boston Public Schools, then Denver Public Schools, which then took me to Phoenix, Arizona, back to Arizona, and where I
Mhm.
was a director of curriculum. And then when that, I always did 2 year contracts. I figured I can do 2 years anyway after I retire. So this is starting in 2009. And what ended up happening is that I got a position doing leadership coaching for a charter school network that went across Arizona. And this is like a couple months before COVID. Lo and behold, COVID starts. I was on a 1 year contract. We went through the COVID, and the company said, "Listen, we only do 1 year contracts, but do you want to do another year?" I said, "Sure." So I did another year. We went to another year post COVID, and they said, "Do you want to do another year?" And I said, "Okay, yeah, I'll do another year." And then they said, "Do you want to do another?" I was like, "Whoa, stand back," So well, during that time, I started getting involved, with the coaching and working with the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents, where I'm really support them. Dr. Cabrera with the Four Corners Latinx Leadership Academy, and Dr. Labato with our executive director here in Arizona. Dr. Cabrera's in Colorado. And I do a lot of volunteering support with the Azalas, and I present at different conferences across the country. And with that leadership coaching, it led to people asking me, "Hey, can you coach me? I want to work in central office, or I want to be a principal, or I want to be a director, whatever it might be." So I've been doing that for the last couple of years, and that's kind of just pro bono, where people call me and say, or I'll meet people and they say, "Listen, I heard what you did was with so and so," and I'm like, "Sure." And that's like, let's talk. What can we do to help support you? So I've been doing the coaching the last couple of years and really enjoying it, making a difference, and trying to get more Latinos into leadership within education. Because, and at this point in our life, 20,042, that's when America and the economists has said we're going to have a majority minority country. But when we look at our leadership for education, less than 7% of leaders in America are Hispanic. 2% are women, and in Arizona, it's a little bit higher than that because we're already at the majority, right at the what do you call it, the breaking point of majority minority in Arizona, but we're still at 17, 19% of Hispanic leadership when it comes to teachers, where it comes to coach, principals, counselors, and superintendents, directors. And I worked in a district where I was the only administrator here in Arizona, where I was the only administrator. I was an executive director or director. Take that back, a director. But the superintendent, the executive directors, the assistant superintendents, the principals, the counselors, not one person was a Latino. So, and it was a great district. I love the district, love the people. They just didn't have the opportunities to hire those people because people, when sometimes Latinos see a district like that, they don't apply for it because
Right.
they don't feel comfortable. Luckily, my wife, who is Caucasian, said, "This would be a great place for you to be." And I ended up working there in Queen Creek School District. I had the best superintendent, Dr. Perry, and the best uh, assistant superintendent, Dr. Copeland, who helped guide me and gave me structure, and I just loved working there. And so one of my passions now is what can I do to help leadership Latinos?
Very cool. I
Awesome.
love your story, Larry.
Well,
Busy
thank you.
life.
Yeah.
Busy life.
Yeah. And we like the fact that you're still, committed to contributing, to people and their leadership. Oftentimes, people we talk to kind of shy away from the word leader. It either gets scary or they don't, attribute the traits that they think leaders have to themselves. But you've got quite a success story. So where I kind of want to start is when you said you you had turnaround schools. What
Yes.
what were a couple of things that caused the turnaround?
Well, part of turnaround is leadership, and leaders, some people shy away from leaders because they haven't developed leaders. So unless you develop leaders, you can't be a leader. So I mean, that's you know, I don't know, the chicken and the egg. My wife says don't use metaphors because I get them mixed up. So when something about somebody coming first, I don't know who, but when I say about with the schools, I I got offered a position to take over a school, and the school, luckily for me, is had an 8% in the math. It had a 20% in the reading and like a 23% in the writing, or right around there. So I mean, the scores are really low. And my
Mhm.
wife said, do you want to take over this school? And I'm like, hey, I know I can't do worse than 8%. So part of the leadership is getting your teachers to feel that they're leaders, providing structure, providing modeling, providing the different examples, providing a blueprint for success, providing accountability, and that goes with the teachers, that goes with the students, and it goes especially with the parents. And I know I was very strict with the kids, especially in the beginning of the year. And I know that if you had like, I don't know, three tardies or something like that, and you had to go into after school detention. And I remember this one kid came in, it was her third time. I remember her name, Sailor. And Sailor says, hey, Mr. Martinez, I'm late, it's my third time. And the father goes, hey, it's my fault. I'm like, hey, no worries, sir. I get what you're saying, but this is her third time. So you have a choice here. I need to have someone in after school detention for three tardies. So it can be either you, since you say it's your fault, or the student. So you choose. But if she's not there, if one person's not there, she's going into Saturday school. And the kid, that I remember, the father looked at the kid and goes, I'll pick you up after school detention. But it really set a tone because Sailor was one of the kids that everybody knew, and the parents had a tight, the PTO and all that, and they said, well, Coach, if Mr. Martinez is going to get on the parent, we better get on our kids. So it
Right.
helps
Yeah,
create a change.
that's
But it was the
yeah,
accountability that we need to have,
yep.
but
Really
also we had,
right.
you celebrate successes, but I give the teachers opportunities to lead the kids, and you can't be a leader unless you have opportunities to lead.
Right.
Yeah,
Need to
that's so
practice.
good. Yeah, and what you focused on, the leader comes in, and first you start with your staff because that's your more direct line, and then once the staff become leaders, then they work on the kids. And then all
Right.
together,
Exactly.
you work with the parents, and accountability and clarity and hope. You know what I mean? You brought them hope because the kids can do it. They just haven't been given the opportunity. That's
Hey, Larry,
fabulous. Oh, I like
Larry, I have a question for you. Did you ever hear about Kids at Hope? It was created by Steve Miller, and it was out of Arizona State University. Did you ever hear that before?
No, I haven't. Well, can you
Yeah,
tell me a little bit
it was
about that?
very positive. It held people accountable, but it also, I can work and strive to work hard. I have a dream and I can work toward that dream. And it was just a culture that we provided in our early childhood program. And it was very cool. And it was through Steve Miller, who actually was, uh, I think he was a professor at University Arizona. So I thought you might have heard of it.
The only Steve Miller I know is that he sings songs.
Yeah, I know. I know who he is too.
I'm sure it's a good program though, because there's some Arizona State provides some great opportunities for education. So I'm
Mhm.
sure he's done a great job and made a difference.
Well, it was about accountability. It was also about having dreams. It wasn't like blowing smoke. It was saying, if you have a dream, you have to work hard toward that dream. I'll climb the ladder every day to accomplish, but I've got that dream, and it was a great culture for our teachers as well as our kids. I mean, it was definitely something that an umbrella that went over our whole program, and I loved it. I loved the thought process and thinking of it from a positive nature, which I can tell just in visiting with you right now. You're a very positive guy.
Well, what ends up happening in a lot of the programs, we have a will to win but do we have a will to practice? And like I said, I was an athlete, and everybody wants to be the
Mhm.
state champ or the All American or the pro athlete, but and we all have the will to win, but do we have the will to practice? Because
And work
if you
hard.
don't do that umbrella, if you don't do all the portions that are underneath that umbrella, you're never going to win. So when I was a
Exactly.
high school coach, I told the kids, hey, we all want to be state champ. You want to be here at 5 o'clock in the morning going over drills? You want to be here after school looking at video? Do you want to be, on Saturdays doing the hard workouts? Are you going to be doing the stuff when you get home, eating properly? And that goes the same thing with our education, our teachers, and our principals.
Right.
Hey, everybody can, everybody can be a principal from 8 to 5. That's easy. I mean, everybody can be a principal today because we're on summer break. And as I went to go coach a principal today, and I said, man, I could be a principal all year, all summer long, and no kids, no teachers, no parents. I love it. But that's the easy part. So you got to get to that by putting in the hard work. And you're absolutely correct.
Right.
You know, you and I don't know how intentional it was when you first started, but you are definitely a culture builder. You came in, whether you were coaching, whether you were principaling, whether you were leadership coaching, and you built a culture, probably one person at a time, and then it infiltrated to the whole group. Talk to me about, was that something you just did? Is something you learned? Talk to me about being a culture builder.
Well, part of it's intrinsic, of course. You get people that want to take the lead from the start. I mean, you get people who want to be the pitcher. Some people want to, they want the ball at the last second to shoot the shot, or they want to be able to raise their hand. And you could ask my daughter Lexi about this because she says, Dad, you created a culture making it, how to win. And always used to tell her, second place is the first loser. I guess I don't know if that's good or bad, but in actuality, it is. So, how do you create that
Mhm.
culture? And being one of the things that helped me is that I went to 10 different schools by the time I hit high school. I
Mhm.
lived in another different countries. I lived in Michigan. I lived in Tennessee in the 60s in the South. So that was different. I lived in Oakland. I lived in Detroit. I lived in Arizona. I lived in Denver. But one of the things that I learned as a young individual, and they say you learn everything that you need to know about leadership by puberty, is that you have to learn how to get
Mhm.
along. You have to learn how to collaborate. And if you don't learn how to get along, three things are going to happen. One, you're going to sit by yourself at lunchtime. Two, you're going to get beat up at lunchtime. Or three, you're going to be hanging out with somebody at lunchtime. So take your choice. So
Right.
I wanted to hang out and play ball with everybody and with the other kids. So I learned how to get along, and you learn how to give and take, because sometimes you can't be a leader. You can't start off saying, hey, I'm going to be the captain. You got to work your way,
Mhm.
develop the leadership. You
Yep.
have to gain the trust. You have to develop the relationships. You have to develop an ability to collaborate with people. And I used to tell my daughter, this is why you join sports, honey. Not for you. I don't care if you ever win a championship, but it's how to work with people. Now she is a
Mhm.
director in a small town out in Colorado where she's in charge of the environmental sciences of the whole city. And it's a suburb of Denver. And she tells me, Dad, those areas that you taught me about being a leader and being how to work with people helps me in my job now.
Right.
So part of it, a lot of
Yeah.
it's intrinsic, but along the way, you win, you get some awards and people pat you on the back, and it becomes a little bit more extrinsic. And when I'm coaching people or coaching uh, principles, some of them are a little bit more intrinsic, where it comes from a little bit from inside, and some of them say, hey, you need to say, hey, this is why it's working. Here's what you're doing. Here's some
Mhm.
accolades of what you're receiving. So when somebody gets a principal of the year, or somebody gets administrator of the year, or somebody gets recognized in their district, we all like that. And so it goes back to being extrinsic also, but I think a lot of it comes to intrinsic and the values that you've been taught as a child.
Right. Right. I'm curious, you
Yeah.
on your
And you,
turnaround school, how did you get, what were the numbers afterwards? Did you see a huge difference?
Oh my gosh. So I can still remember my 8% in math went to 35%. and we
Oh my
and we
gosh.
ended up having. I had to put in it was a middle school. I put in a freshman algebra class for the top kids. But what I did though with those eight with everybody had to take a support class as an elective, and I extended all the classes to 75 minutes, and I only had 5 classes, and I made mandatory
Well,
tutoring for anybody who got a D. So if you got a D in any class for, we did weekly checks, you went into after school tutoring. The kids hated it. Our reading went to 72 and our writing went to, I think 68 it was. And we were one of the top middle schools in Tucson with our scores. So we outperformed the majority of charter schools. I was public school administrator for years, and it was a charter school I took over. We outperformed all the charter schools in our area and all the public schools in the area that we were in.
I
So,
love
but I was very fortunate. I had some great teachers. I had one teacher, and sad to say that when she took the job, I she came with the school, and I don't know how I would say that differently. And I felt that she wasn't a good fit for our kids, so I got
no,
you know coached her out, and I was very fortunate to get another teacher. Her name was Lisa, and she
no.
came in, and she was the best thing since sliced bread. And I remember her coming in one day. She says, "Mr. Martinez, can I shut the door?" And I said, "Sure." And she sat down and she just burst out the tears. And this girl is tough. And she said, "I never cry. I've never cried. But these kids are driving me crazy. I don't know what to do." Because it was very low socioeconomic, high minority. All the kids have been, 50% of the kids have been expelled from one school or had been suspended from another school and ended up at this charter school. So I said, "Hey, let's get a plan of action, how I can support you. What do you need? I've been in your classroom. Here's what I see that you can do." We worked together. My science scores went up, but what ended up happening, the, our because of my English teacher and my math teacher, who were so good, everything else went up. And it's funny
Yeah.
that the woman I was coaching today, her name is Carla. I always forget her last name, Martinez. Can you believe it? It's like, and so Carla she just got a principal job, and she's starting July 1. And I've been coaching her through the last 10, 12 years. And we always, we meet once every couple months and just talk about it. But she had a plan. She kept the kids accountable. I gave her leadership responsibilities. And now her kid just got into what we call University High in Tucson, which is actually one of the top 20 ranked schools in America. And she always says, all the things I learned, as a teacher over the years, I've used them on my daughter, kind of like me. But everything, back to the story, all our scores went up, and I had some great teachers. I couldn't have done them without people like Carla Palacio or Carla
that.
Martinez. Her maiden name is
Uh,
Palacio. Carla Martinez. I was like, how can I forget that?
It takes a
oh,
team,
that's
and no one person can do it by themselves. But bringing them together and helping them to feel valued and giving them hope to be able to turn things around makes huge difference.
Yes. Oh, Lisa Rick.
yeah. You gave them a structure to win.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry,
Sorry, Lisa
you gave them
Rick.
a structure to win.
Yes.
You were creating winners. Absolutely,
And I
with that
think
accountability, and it's clean. Accountability is clean. It makes it cut and dried, and you know what it takes, and no messing around with, "Oh, honey, you're okay."
exactly. One of the things I always tell people, I wish every kid had to take wrestling in middle school. And they say, "Why is that?" And I said, "Because somebody's going to get beat, and you're going to get pinned, or you're going to
Yeah,
get laid on your back, and you're going to have to get up. You can't stay there."
Right.
And one of the things that we try to teach the kids is how to fail, because we don't
yeah,
teach kids how to fail anymore. As we're at the first at our birthday party, the kid's trying to walk. He's not walking yet. He's standing, and people are all around him, behind him, getting ready to hold him if he falls. I'm like, let him fall. He's gonna have to learn to fall. I get these bad looks, but anyway, you're right. It's a team,
well,
and we have to teach them how to fail before they can win. Because as an athlete, I've lost more times than I've won. And I think most people have lost more than they won. But did they still keep the attitude of being of how to lose, or what did they
Yeah.
learn from that experience? And you may never ever win, but you can
Well,
improve.
That was always
well,
that was frustrating to me, Larry, when we were setting up play areas outdoors. And our society has gotten very fearful of somebody suing or some kind of thing going on. But they would take the play toy. We had 3, 4, and 5 year olds in our program. They would take it by the littlest or the youngest child, and they would make it all work for that 3 year old. So there was not a challenge for the 4 and 5 year olds. And I said, we can spot these kids. We can make it so that they can have something to, try for and give them some challenge. That, but because the system, the way it worked, it was hard to get them to listen and understand. It has to go beyond just the minimal dominate, denomination or person. It's got to be something that gives opening for people to be able to try different things and do new things and yeah.
Well, go to
I love the story about your grandson and walking, because what I always tell people is if you carried around that baby for 2 years, he wouldn't be able to walk. He needs to fall and get up to build those muscles. I don't have the muscles to walk unless I fall and then get
Right.
up. So that's a great analogy. I love it.
yeah,
And you helped the kids and the teachers to build muscles,
yeah,
resilience
exactly.
and
Resilience
persistence. Yeah.
Resilience is a great word because that's what we all need. We need to learn how to fail and to keep trying. It goes back to
Mhm.
grit. When you hear Miss Duckworth on the YouTube videos, she talks a lot about grit. But I think what a lot of people who have been successful have had grit their whole life. They just didn't know it. And I think a lot of us have different skill sets that we've had that have made us successful, or have helped us get to the path of success, which we didn't know we had. It just came intrinsically, or we learned it from our brother or our sister or mother, father, neighbor, whoever it was, teacher. None of us would be here without teachers. So
Right.
somebody along the way
No,
reinforced that resilience.
and teaching is so important. You referenced that at the very beginning when we first started talking about how important the teachers in your life were. And we have a gal that's on one of our podcasts who grew up in war torn Lebanon. And she's just got lots of stories about learning and fighting the culture of the Middle East. And she just wrote an article last Sunday. I'll try to send it to you,
Great.
but it's talking about teaching as healing.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is. When you have a teacher that cares for you and listens to you and helps you learn through, resilience and building upon building, then it's really healing. But no matter what your wound is, it heals you, and it's a calling. But not everybody has it. Oh my gosh, I've dealt with too many teachers that come with the building, so to speak. And in the public school system, it's really hard to help them to find a different profession.
Yes. Well, that's why as an administrator and leadership coach, we have to coach those people to whatever place they could be successful.
Right.
How's
Right.
it how's a track coach? There's 17 events. Somebody's going to be good at something, but somebody's not going to be good at something. So within our
That's right.
teachers, some of
That's
these teachers, they may have gotten to the profession, and it may not be the best fit for them. They might be a better accountant or a better nurse or a
right.
better construction work or whatever it might be, but teaching may not have been their strength. And they've tried to fit a round peg in a square hole, and it just hasn't worked.
Right. Right. You're
Right,
giving you're
right.
giving a gift to somebody if it's not the right fit for them. You're giving them a gift to help them understand and realize that there's something else that they could do that would match them better.
Hopefully. So,
Yeah.
some people,
Well,
Right.
yeah,
it,
and
and I'll give you another,
hopefully,
in using my daughter an example. She says, "Dad, why do you always talk about me?" But my daughter, when she was in high school, did the AP classes, college prep classes, but everything was focused on marketing. And she was going to go into business school, gets into the University of Arizona, goes into the business college, Aller College, very good college, is there a year, says, Dad, I don't like this. I want to be a veterinarian. So she goes, changes her degree to animal science, does a great job, graduates, uh, starts being a vet tech, working to, trying to get into vet school, and then says, you know what, Dad, I want to be a park ranger. So she ends up being a park ranger, and she does that. And then a job opens up in the city near where she lives as an uh, what they call a director of open spaces, and she's in charge of everything to do with environmental sciences. So she's gone through a myriad of different pathways, and she has finally found her niche. But some
Right.
people, I knew I wanted
Yeah.
to be a teacher when I was in the fourth grade. She took a little bit longer because maybe she needed to see, and as I think of myself as an administrator, maybe I should have thrown her out the forest, with because I don't camp. My idea of camping is staying at a hotel that doesn't serve breakfast. You know,
Yes, I can
that's
agree
my
with you.
idea of camping. My daughter loves to camp. She goes and takes a bath in the stream. I'm like, honey, that ain't for me, man. But so everybody is good at something, and
Right.
everybody is not good at other
Mhm.
areas. We have
Right.
to just find the niche, and
Yeah.
as a
And
coach and teacher, we have to help support those students and leaders to get to where they feel
uh
most comfortable.
Well, and in today's world, especially, and I think it's been true for probably the last 30 years, is we need to teach kids how to transition, not just jump in a box and stay there. It's okay to, say, well, this doesn't quite fit. And, whether that's self awareness or what. But I mean, in today's world, you need to learn how to transition from careers or, to find that perfect fit. Absolutely true.
Exactly. And one of the things we need to do as educators is teach our students how to be teachers because our teaching field is every day we lose another teacher. It's a profession that people don't go in. So what aren't we doing correctly? So we need to take a step back as administrators and leaders. And we have STEM. We have all these you know gifted kids and all these
Right.
different programs. But name a program that's a school district that is specific not on technology but on teaching. We talk about
Mhm.
math, we talk about engineering, we talk about technology, we talk about the sciences, but who's going to teach those people those areas if we don't do a better job as administrators in getting our students ready to be teachers? So I'm sorry, I don't mean get on my
I,
high horse there.
I think there's a lot of teachers out there that do not feel supported by the districts that they are working in. When you've got some really tough behaviors that you're trying to deal with, I think administrators need to align themselves with that and help them problem solve and help them feel supported. And I think that that's part of the reason why we're losing our good teachers is they don't feel like they've got that.
It's true, and,
Well,
and a
and I
lot of our
think yeah,
administrators. I'm
they don't
sorry.
know how to teach. A lot of the
And
administrators aren't good teachers.
but a lot of our administrators have their hands tied because of
Right,
the parents
Mhm.
and the way school boards have now taken over and telling the teachers what they should be teaching.
right,
Yet,
right.
these are the parents who have the students that are causing not causing but are having challenges within the classroom, and they're saying they know what's best. It's like I don't ask a teacher to write curriculum. I ask a teacher to teach. I don't ask a parent
Mhm.
to teach. I ask them to be
Mhm.
supportive of the teacher. But
Right,
since
Right.
COVID,
Right.
because they had to turn on the computer, everybody thinks they're a teacher now. And it's not
yeah.
true. There's specific
Yeah,
skills that are
I get
needed to be an effective teacher.
Well, my
Yeah,
mom
I
and dad
totally.
would tell me if I got in trouble at school, I would also get in trouble when I got home. And there's been a real shift in the families and the school districts being able to work well together and holding people responsible for who needs to be responsible for it. Instead of pointing fingers, we all need to take a piece of that pie and figure out how to make it work.
Well,
Well,
I
and
remember,
Larry, as you talked about earlier, I'll give the floor back to you in a second, but
sure.
accountability is so much a part of it. I remember back when I was teaching third grade, and I was the gatekeeper, and I was the only one in the school. I was in a private school. Those kids were not going to fourth grade till they knew how to read, because fourth grade curriculum is content, and they would not succeed. But it's not easy to stand up and say no. And that's what, that's a piece of the pie. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that I interrupted you, but going back to what you said, you get home, you get in trouble at school, you get a whooping at school, then you get a whooping at home, and
Yep.
nowadays, the parent comes to school and says, "What did you do wrong to make my student not
Right.
be successful?"
Right.
And I'm like, "Wait, hey, wait a minute, man! Your kid said F you to the kid next to him because he wouldn't share his pencil. That's not appropriate." Well, why didn't he have his pencil to begin with? Not focusing on the issue, but focusing on what could you do differently
Right.
rather than put the onus, as you said, the accountability on the student.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we do have a lot of
Yep.
issues. And one of the areas I always tell people, I blame Starbucks for all this. First of all, I blame Burger King, then Starbucks. And they say, why is that? I said, because Burger King used to say, you can get your hamburger
Okay.
your own way. And so that morphed into Starbucks, where now rather than just going in and get a regular coffee, you can get a double pump with two squirts, latte, this and that. You have five
Yes,
different
yeah.
things, and we individualize it. So now every teacher or every parent wants their kid to have individualized education. So my sister-in-law, my wife, who are both teachers, they have 25 kids in the class. Now they have to teach 25 different curriculums for these kids because each parent wants their kid to be taught. I said, what happened to the melting pot where everybody learned together and then we pulled
Right.
back? They
Right.
wanted
Separate.
individualized instruction starting from the minute they walk in the door, rather than the whole classroom learning together and then have them individualized. And then, God forbid, you spend more time with you rather than her.
Right.
You
Yeah.
don't like my
Yeah.
kid. I'm like, wait a minute. Your kid's got it. Your kid's doing well. So like, it's very
Yeah.
hard to please, and it's a different world that we live in, and so we know this is the world. So what are we going to do to navigate
Yep.
that? What are we going to do to make a difference? How are we going to work with the teachers? How are we going to work with the parents? How are we going to work with the kids? Because like the internet
That's what.
is here, we have to learn to deal with it.
Right.
AI is here. How are we going to learn to
Yep.
deal with it? Parents are
Right.
the way they are.
Absolutely.
How are we going to learn to deal with it?
Yeah.
So I've got a question for you around teaching, because I know
Yes,
that
ma'am.
you know it when you see it. And what are some identifiers where you could go, okay, these are the three essential qualities for teachers?
Well, that's a good question. And one of the things that we used to look at when we did our interviews is we first of all, does the teacher know the content? I mean, it's
Mhm.
very difficult to hire a teacher who's going to teach fourth grade who doesn't know fractions. So
Right.
because they're going to have to teach fractions. So does the teacher know the
Hmm.
content? The second thing is the teacher willing to be adaptable? So is when he has 25 kids and he has to adapt the curriculum 25 different ways, is
Right.
he going to be adaptable? The third thing, does he have a passion? Does he have a love for kids and love for teaching? And the fourth thing is he willing to ask questions? Is because the greatest strength is
Mm.
knowing to ask for help. Is he going to
Yeah.
ask for help, or is he going to sit there and flounder? And I'm gonna get there in November, and I'm like, I've told you, you let me know what's going on. Well, I didn't want you to think I was weak, or I didn't want you to think I know. I was like, I think worse now.
Yeah.
We've lost 3 months. So those are
Yeah.
the areas that I look for.
Good. I like it. Um, One thing, and I think it's in this list that you had, but I mean, I can walk into a classroom and I know within 5 minutes, if the teacher's engaging with the students and connecting with them, then usually they're a good teacher. They're not just having the bobblehead go on. They're lecturing and the kids are just going, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's that
Yeah,
engagement and the caring. I mean, it's there for sure. And the ask questions, to be a good teacher, you need to be a good learner. And
exactly.
that doesn't mean I don't know my content, but I need to be open to learning, because if I'm open to learning, that helps my students be open to learning. It's a good role model, and it's something that is viscerally felt. It doesn't depend on that. I mean, we have to meet the standards, but good. I like your list. Good list. Sandy, what would you say about qualities of a good teacher?
I think that being teachable. I've talked about this in some of my other podcasts. I've done a lot of hiring in my world in my life, and one of the things is if a person is teachable, then we can work together. And there's something different in every culture, or every classroom that you're working. So you have to be open to learning, and again, like you said, being adaptable. And you can tell when somebody's not interested in being able to learn new messages or understand a different environment that they're working at. You can tell.
Yes.
Yeah, it is pretty apparent for, I don't, like you say, it seems to be very, very rare, but I think if we can inspire people to go into teaching because they love, because of these things, that's going to open it up. But it's been a real, there's been too many walls for people to be able to be good teachers. And,
Well, yeah, and you know what Larry is saying is that you have to really love and care about people if you're going to be in a classroom setting, because I've heard stories of kids and grandkids where it's just very apparent that they're just putting in their time and they don't really want to be there because they don't really care about their audience. And it's like, boy, that has to be there to be able to actually, engage, like you said, Sue, with the people that you're working with.
Yes.
Mhm.
I'm very lucky to be around my wife and my sister-in-law because they're both here this weekend. My sister-in-law, who has been teaching, she's going to be 60, and she's going on her 39th year. My
Wow.
wife taught and retired, and after COVID, they couldn't find teachers, so they called her back to come and teach, and she taught for 3 years. They just
Wow.
have a love of teaching. Here, my wife's been out for a couple years now. My sister-in-law is retiring next year, and they're
Mhm.
still talking about how can we improve instruction within the classroom. And my sister-in-law is asking me, "What do you think I should be doing?" Or what did you see within second grade to create
Yeah.
assessments so that way we can continue to work with them? And
Yeah.
she is an excellent teacher. And my wife, great teacher, what did second grade in ELL. My mother-in-law was a teacher also, so that was great. And now
Yeah.
my sister-in-law teaching second grade. So everybody is teachers, within
Well,
my
yeah, you
wife's
can't.
family, and they're still talking. Well, although my mother-in-law passed, but before they passed, they would sit around and talk about teaching. I'm like,
Right.
Yep.
hey man, you know
That's right.
the you know the Lakers are on. The Denver Broncos are playing. Man, come on, let's talk about something good. They want to talk about teaching strategies and how to
Yeah.
how to improve
It's,
grammar within
it's
the
a,
second grader. I'm like, I'm out.
yeah.
Say,
Well, yeah, you would be a great family to try to open a school. But teaching is in you and you can't quit. That's why Sandy and I are doing this. It
great.
has to do with, we love what we're doing, and we're going to have you back and talk more about leadership and teaching and the love of it, and we'll inspire people to move ahead in it, and we'll inspire administrators to stop closing the doors and start opening them so people can actually teach and not just, play cards or whatever, they think they're doing.
Well, there's more good teachers and more good administrators than there are bad ones. And
Right.
that's what I've seen
Yes.
within the classroom. And a lot of
Mhm.
us, because of today's societal needs and because of our political climate, we have some barriers that we never had in the past. The way our society has treats teachers. It's not the way they treat teachers in Japan. We do not have the respect. And where did that
No.
start? And a lot of it started because just because every politician went to school doesn't mean they could be a good teacher. Just because
Yeah.
I know how to hold a hammer doesn't mean I can build a house. There comes different
That's
strategies and skill sets that come
mhm.
with those professions. And I think a lot of these people who make rules for teachers have never been in the
Mhm.
classroom, yet they feel that they know what's best for kids because you've had a kid. Well, you have to get a license to drive a car, but you don't have to get a license to have a child. So there is some
Yeah.
different types of perspectives that we have to look at when it comes
Mhm.
to looking at what's best for our children and who's better than the people who have been trained. I
Right.
don't want I don't want me doing heart surgery on someone like heart surgery on my
Yeah.
mom when she had to go in, because just because I've seen
Mhm.
a heart and had an anatomy class doesn't mean I'm going to know how to do this. Yet these other people who have been in the classroom feel that they know what's best for our teachers.
Yeah.
So we need to put some limits and
Right.
make sure our administrators have the tools that they can be successful given today's
Mhm.
political and societal
Sure.
issues.
Yep. Yep.
What I'd like to have you back on to talk about is getting beyond the toxic cultures in schools. And I love what Parker Palmer says, that the students are watching. And it's my story. That's where the students get the bullying, is from watching the adults. And I'm sure you have, in the communities that you've built, you have found some, I don't know, accountability pieces, or, I know Sandy, in her cultures that she was in, she kind of put her foot down and said, this is not going to happen anymore. And so there's a piece of courage and steadfastness in good administrators that won't tolerate the BS anymore. So
Yes.
I know we have to kind of let you go, but I'd like you to consider coming back on for that if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I
You're
would
going to be
love
one
to.
of our
And I'm sorry.
you're going to be one of our key people to come in talking
Well,
about culture change.
Well, thank you so much. I've just enjoyed the conversation. You guys bring up such great points, and it's always good to talk with people who have experience and work with children and work with leaders and work with teachers and work with parents, because sometimes people have worked with teachers but they haven't worked with parents, or people have worked with students but they haven't worked with leaders. So
Yeah.
that's good in itself, but it's great to have a person, people like you who have been through the different realms of education and can speak to each aspect.
Yeah. So how we kind of close our podcast is we ask a question: what's one takeaway that you've taken away from this conversation, Larry? We'll go around. You get to start.
Well, one takeaway, and that's a good question. That's a good way to finish off, because it kind of gives a conclusion. So it's kind of like the end of the question that you asked at the end of class to check for understanding. So I love it. But one of the things that I take away is that we need to do we need to continue to do what we're doing as educators, and put the word out that we do have good teachers and we do have good leaders and we do have good administrators. But as anything else, Tom Brady's going to throw an interception once in a while. So things are going to happen. So how can we do it so we don't throw as many interceptions? And I sorry to use the sports cliches all the time,
That
but
works.
Okay.
you know, you're going to get a flat tire once in a while. So what can you do so you don't get the flat tire as often? You know what's going to happen. It's not a question, if it's going to happen. It's when it's going to happen. So how do you prepare yourself? And one of the takeaways I'm getting from being on this podcast is, what can we do so that way we can continue to be successful and get over the bumps in the road, because there will be bumps and there will be obstacles. So how do we maneuver past those?
Yep.
Yeah, I like that. Sandy, how about you? What's your takeaway?
I always love a Rocky story, Larry. And when you're telling me about the turnaround schools and what you did and how you helped make something that was struggling into something that was beautiful, I love that. That's like, it gets my heart. Very cool.
Thank you.
I'm taking away what you said a little earlier, and it relates right back to what you were saying. just now, that we need to teach people how to fail.
Yeah.
It
Yes.
teaching, so we can be ready for that interception, ready for the lose, because then we can get right back up. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I did a podcast with Mr. Pablo Munoz, and he's former superintendent in New Jersey, and he's had a podcast for several years. But one of the things we talked about, and I always talk about how to fail, and he says there's a lot of research about that, and how we,
Mhm.
as educators, teach people, what's wrong first. And I always tell people one of the best administrators, I don't want to mention her name, and passed a long time ago, but she was the greatest person ever and one of the worst administrators that I ever worked with. But I learned what not to do. But I learned some good things
Yeah.
from her, but I also learned what not to do. Where I've had,
Mhm.
the good administrators all do the great things. The administrators that have challenges all do different things, not
Mhm.
as good. So you have a wide repertoire to follow, where the good ones all
Yeah.
do the great things the same way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you have a spirit of hope that is fabulous. Thank you
Well,
for that.
when we have to, if we have grandchildren, if we don't have the hope, who's going to have the hope for them?
Right. Right.
There you
Exactly.
go. That's right. They're coming
Yeah,
up,
I'm
and
always
they have to
looking.
learn how to walk.
Yeah,
I love
I'm
it.
always
So,
looking out for Ash.
oh, I love it. I love it. I'm gonna end our recording now, but I want you to hang on for just a minute for afterwards. So give us about 30 seconds, okay? Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Larry. It was wonderful
Thank you
meeting
both.
you.
Nice meeting you. Appreciate it. Thank you both.